Well, the broadcast is live, ladies and gentlemen. Wow. I got my wrinkled shirt on. Got the baseball bat. Corey, you're sitting there. Someday you'll reveal to the listeners and viewers what those newspaper stories are behind you. Are they a collection of Corey DeAngelis news clips?
I mean, yeah, they're the ones that come out around here. So like I got the Wall Street Journal back there, New York Post.
All right.
Talk about the Harvard stuff, the Elizabeth Warren hypocrisies on the wall behind me.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I mean, those were there before I started doing these podcasts and stuff. But if you don't remember, I used to have books behind me and stuff, but it was like so distracting. If the dog was walking around back there, you could probably see him. So I decided to go into this corner. There's not many corners for me to use in this place. It's very small in the middle of DC. But
I suspect that there'll be a clamoring to see your dog at some point. The dog, an appearance by the dog.
He's laying next to me right here.
Oh, really?
Last night.
Go ahead then. Yeah.
The webcam.
It's too hard.
I got shorts on. Yeah, I'm not going to do that. But last night I was doing an interview with Michael Malice. He's one of the big libertarian speakers, and Radar's like in the background, like hawking up a lung, just like, like super loud. And Malice is like, "Is that a dog?" And I'm like, "Yeah, that was my dog." And I was like in the middle of trying to explain something about the Harvard stuff.
People stop caring.
He's usually right here, very quiet. He's almost 15 years old.
Oh,
so.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, about 5 years ago, incidentally, we had an appearance on Choice Media live stream by Robert Pondicio's dog. So, and that was a big hit. Pretty much, that was, people cared more about the dog than anything anyone else said. But anyway, so let's do a clean in. Let's hit it, everybody. Welcome to Random Assignment. I'm Bob Bowden with Choice Media, joined as usual by at DeAngelis Corey. Those on Twitter will know what a Twitter storm one man can actually elicit. And Corey, how are you today?
Doing pretty well. And the Twitter storm was erupting right before we started this. I had my phone right in front of me. That's why I'm pulling up the tweet really quick. But there's an update on the Harvard mess, and it came out just a little bit ago, and I had to respond to it like a 20-tweet thread or something like that because it was so ridiculous.
By Harvard update, you're talking about the anti-homeschooling conference originally scheduled by Professor Elizabeth Bartholet at Harvard. That conference then got canceled, many say because of you, and then there was kind of an Empire Strikes Back moment where Harvard Magazine published new anti-homeschooling opinions. So go ahead. What's the new part?
Yeah, and we recently talked about how she had a full-length interview that came out a week or two ago where she described her presumptive ban that looked a little more like an all-out ban, and she just changed the definition of homeschooling to mean that, well, you only get to homeschool 90% of the time. In my view, you have to take regular classes as well. But she just co-authored a piece that came out, again, really recently, I think yesterday, today, with James Dwyer, who she co-organized that anti-homeschooling propaganda conference with, and a bunch of other people who were supposed to be represented at that conference. And the funny thing here is that the whole point of this article is that she's saying that, the homeschooling crowd is bullying her on the debate about homeschooling. So her and her colleagues at Harvard University and elsewhere started this huge attack on homeschooling with their conference, but then also the Harvard Magazine piece on the risk of homeschooling, where they portray homeschool families to be, child abusers and to be
locked behind bars in a prison cell. We see a girl behind bars there.
So they essentially bullied the heck out of homeschoolers and called for a ban on the practice of homeschooling based on these broad brushes that they're trying to use against the homeschooling community to make them look like bad people. And then once we responded to these articles, she's saying, and her colleagues, James Dwyer and others, that they're being bullied. And what they point to in particular is they say that the tweets from people like Senator Ted Cruz were abusive and bullying tactics, which I don't see how a tweet from Ted Cruz was bullying at all. I don't have it open right now, but all he pretty much said was, look, this is myopic. This is unconstitutional. And he was talking about her ban. And so like responding to your presumptive ban or all out ban on homeschooling, that's not bullying. That's just public debate. And she goes through this, or, you know, the whole group of them go through this and essentially play the victim here. I mean, of course, there are probably some people who said mean things to her and that were out of line. But what Senator Ted Cruz said was not out of line. I don't think I saw anything from Mike Pompeo that was over the line that crosses into, you know, abuse or bullying. It's just they responded to this ridiculous attack on homeschoolers. And I think that's perfectly fine for them to do. And, you know, they go through this and they say like, oh, we can't believe that, you know, there's so much pushback to our civil, data-driven discussion, our academic critique of homeschooling. And, you know, look, come on, your discussion was not data-driven. You used the word some or many 210 times in your 80-page article. You didn't cite statistics to back up your claims. You used fear-mongering. It wasn't an academic critique. But look, this is what has me pumped up, you know, today. Just this whole... And I responded to it on Twitter if anyone wants to go check it out. But it's like a 20-tweet, you know, thread taking on each of these arguments. She even says that, you know, Senator Ted Cruz is trying to suppress public discussion. No, we're not. We're just responding to the presumptive ban, this authoritarian ban. And if anyone is suppressing public discussion, it's their side, because their event was closed off, invitation only featured speakers that were against homeschooling. They had a private event. Our event was public, and we're all talking about this and with public discussion on social media. She's the one that is trying to suppress public discussion. But look, I'm going off the rails here. I could talk about this for hours. There's so much to unpack with this article. A lot of the same things that she argued before that are ridiculous, and not just her, but the other individuals represented on that opinion piece. But I recommend for anyone to go check it out. There's so much to unpack. It's one of these longer form tweet threads. Oh, and I also, real quick, I have this video to share for the viewers too. But in 2014, I found this. She essentially argued against her current day ban. Her current argument against the ban is that she says that there are some cases of abuse, and since there are, you know, these rare cases of abuse, so we should ban it for everyone. That's her argument. But in 2014, she argued against that line of reasoning when it came to international adoption versus institutionalization. She argued that we should allow international adoption because, you know, the cases of abuse, all, you know, they do happen and it's not perfect, but, you know, we shouldn't punish everybody, she says, for the actions of a few people. So she uses the same arguments that I'm using and the pro homeschoolers are using to say, no, you shouldn't ban it. And she's right here with international adoption. You shouldn't use the exception to prove the rule. You shouldn't generalize using extreme outliers. So just really quickly for the audience, I want to play this video where in 2014, Elizabeth Bartholet totally demolishes her current day argument to ban homeschooling.
I think it's a tiny phenomenon compared to the number of international adoptions. And I think that the people who don't like international adoption, as apparently you do not, and as UNICEF doesn't, regularly love the fact that occasionally scandals show up, because those scandals can be used as a way to help shut down international adoptions.
You're being a bit unfair on me, because I've never argued for shutting down international adoption.
Beautiful.
That's great research to find it.
Thank you.
She cites the fact that she you know, they were having an academic discussion until mean bulliers like Corey DeAngelis showed up on the scene and Ted Cruz showed up on the scene. What kind of academic pursuit for knowledge bans all opinions that don't agree with the people throwing the conference? How is that some sort of open academic pursuit of truth?
It's not academic and open inquiry. It's not civil discourse.
It's the opposite. Right? It's the opposite of it.
And look, she was right here back in 2014. But look, let's just read this, and replacing the word adoption with homeschooling. If you do that, she destroys her own argument. Here's her quote with replacing those words. people who do not like homeschooling love the fact that occasionally scandals show up because those scandals can be used as a way to shut down homeschooling. There you go. Elizabeth Bartholet, in her own words, destroys her present day argument to ban homeschooling for everyone based on a few cases of rare negative events.
Yeah,
Ouch.
and let's also, since we're here anyway, let's acknowledge the elephant in the room, which is that all kinds of school choice opponents use the same tactics. They'll find a charter school scandal somewhere where one charter school maybe is bad, and they'll say, "Look at this terrible, paradigm." Or they'll find a place, or maybe a place where vouchers are done bad. Say maybe Louisiana law is not the best voucher law, and they'll focus on that. Anecdote is to say all state voucher laws are performing. This is a representative of all. So so that's basically common in the opposition movement for reform.
Yeah, it's totally true. It's like if Louisiana's voucher program, in your view, isn't working, and if they didn't, in your view, make good decisions about where to spend that voucher money, why should me living in DC, or if I were living in California, why should that prevent me from being able to choose schools for my children? You're using these extreme outliers, it's, again, to block people's freedoms in general, which is exactly what they're doing with the homeschool discussion here. I just want to play another little short clip from that same interview. She gets so mad about the fact that the lady from Russia Today was using the exception to prove the rule and tried to generalize with extreme cases, which Elizabeth Bartholet was right there, but she even gets so mad about it that she threatens to leave the interview because she's saying, look, I'm not going to do this where you're just cherry
That's like
picking.
shutting down a conference when people want to come who don't agree with you. That's like leaving the interview, shutting down the conference. I see a correlation there.
Here it is. Check it out.
So I'm not going to talk more about Reuters. You can conduct the rest of the interview yourself. I'm not going to conduct an interview in which we focus on a tiny phenomenon that has nothing to do with the sort of underlying truth of how well kids do when they're kept in institutions as compared to how well they do in international adoption.
All right.
Right.
Well, let's move on. We've got a lot to hit.
Yep.
Corey. So I want to do a quick Betsy DeVos update. It's kind of a multi-layered update. We have first this one. DeVos pushes ahead with a policy to allocate relief money to private schools. Now, I don't know where you stand. This is one of those where it's hard for me to know where Corey's going to stand. It's one of those things where federal money is going to, the subject of private schools, which makes people worry about regulations. But nevertheless, what this is it's brand new money. It's the COVID-19 $2 trillion package, from which $13 billion was carved out to help the nation's schools. And what Secretary DeVos has said is that private schools should get some of this money. We have a fear that all kinds of Catholic schools are either about to go out of business or already have, because they all operate on thin budgets as it is, and to have suddenly all of these kids ordered to stay home by governors, mostly, you have a scenario where these schools desperately need help, and so this has been this big fight, basically a backlash from Democrats. The AP story says that it reroutes money from needy public schools to wealthy private ones. It says the legislation tells states to divide the funding among public schools based on the number and share of low-income students they teach. Well, if you go to talk to the people in Indiana, for example, the public officials there say that they're rejecting DeVos's guidance, arguing that it amounts to no more than a recommendation. In Louisiana, the opponents to DeVos say that this would end up with private schools getting 267% more than they would using the Title I formula. So it's interesting how the numbers are crunched in a way to always make it seem as if private schools are getting, the bulk of the money. In fact, what this is all about is just allocating based on where the poor kids are going to school, and or in this case, also to some extent, all kids are going to school. And if you have a state where a lot of kids are in private school, it says allocate some of this new money, this COVID-19 special backfill money to the private schools based just simply on enrollment prorated by enrollment. And so, so they're now saying that this is a siphoning away. All of this money should go to the public schools is essentially what they're arguing. And so And so that's a big thing going on. And then you also have the Chicago Teachers Union suing Betsy DeVos over what has been a point she has made, that special needs kids who have IEP programs, specialized educational programs to make sure these special needs kids are getting the education they need, to say that don't take a break just because you're not in a brick and mortar school. Public schools shouldn't be suddenly, freed from doing the IEP assessment they would normally do. Teachers can do it at home. You can at home assess the special needs kids, and these assessments should continue, is what Betsy DeVos says. And we have a clip from the WGN Chicago affiliate about the lawsuit from the Chicago Teachers Union.
Is taking Chicago Public Schools and the Secretary of Education to court over special education classes during COVID-19.
WGN's Tanya Francisco is joining us now live with more on that. Tanya.
Lourdes and Joe, special education teachers say they have gotten no direction on remote learning during this pandemic, and it has only given them more paperwork, I should say. And they say it has made it difficult to instruct students and give them what they need socially, emotionally, and academically.
And this has added an additional 27 hours to my case management / teaching calendar.
Chicago Public Schools special education teachers and social workers say they are already overburdened by the challenges of remote learning, and they say it's diverted them from their main goal of educating students.
We have been very creative in trying to engage with our families in so many ways. We are doing home visits. Our security guards are doing home visits. We are helping distribute laptops and the technology that's necessary. We are calling Comcast to help them with internet connections.
The lawsuit by the Chicago Teachers Union seeks to bar Education Secretary Betsy DeVos and Chicago Public Schools from enforcing teachers to review and revise roughly 70,000 individual education plans, or IEPs, for the rest of the school year, which is about 6 more weeks.
We are looking for relief from onerous and unmeetable bureaucratic paperwork requirements that require us to run as many as 70,000 meetings in order to alter documents. What we need to be doing is having contact with our students.
The press secretary for DeVos fired back in a statement writing, quote, "This is nothing more than political posturing for a headline. It's sad to see the union making excuses for why they can't educate all students instead of figuring out a way to make it happen."
Of course, neither of us love bureaucracy, Corey. The idea, of forcing teachers to do, things a certain way. But when you're forced into a school system with no options, because there's a moratorium in Chicago charters, for example, and kids are stuck and they're stuck there, you do need some sort of accountability measure to help kids who have special needs. All Betsy DeVos said is don't take a vacation on assessing special needs kids' needs. You have to keep doing it. Just because you're at home instead of the brick and mortar school doesn't mean you can't do this continued assessment of what they need. And the union is suing over that.
Do you think the union is trying to push back on this so that they can say, well, if we don't update their IEPs, then, we're having, kind of like how they were arguing about how they can't do virtual learning because of IDEA at the beginning of all the shutdown? Perhaps that would help bolster the argument that, well, we can't teach anybody if there's going to be these inequities. I wonder if that's related in any way with this lawsuit.
Well, pardon my cynical spin, but I sort of see it as something new that, it's a new situation. So let's sue over it and stop us from being, here's a way to create a wedge between accountability and, and work that we might get out of doing. So let's just not have to do that work for these special needs kids. We should be freed from all obligation and basically have zero obligation to update the IEPs. Mm-hmm. So anyway, there's that.
Yeah, I'm typically for allowing teachers to have more autonomy, and like you said, I don't like much bureaucracy and regulations. But you also do make a good point that if there's no bottom up accountability, then we got to make sure in some way that the kid, if you can't vote with your feet, what's the guarantee that every child who is on an IEP will actually get the services that that are free and appropriate for them. And then with the the first story that you brought up with the boosting aid for private schools, I think it's perfectly fine to equally fund schools regardless of the sector here. this is
it's an emergency pot of money. Yes.
If it's not, if it's going to be spent anyway, you might as well allocate it to, I think the best way would be to just allocate it to individual families through an education savings account. Perhaps this is the next best thing where, you're not just picking winners and losers and only giving emergency aid to the schools that are already profiting off taxpayers, whether those taxpayers like it or not. So like the private schools arguably need this emergency funding more than anybody else. Because they can't just take money from the taxpayer to stay afloat. They're having a really tough time right now, and it's because of the government lockdown.
And further, they have the specter of just disappearing completely. If, in other words, unlike the traditional public schools that have no such specter of disappearing completely. So if you're going to say, allocate the priorities, I guess, between these two categories of educational institutions, I would just want some sort of whatever choice is already there. At least it shouldn't get less. And so I would say the existential threat to the private schools outweighs, to me, the possibility of cutbacks at public schools.
Yeah.
All right, but that said, let's go on. You have some Joe Biden stuff for us. Update on
and I will say, I found this clip a long time ago, but it didn't really go viral until, a couple of days ago. But this was something he said at the Public Education Forum, which was hosted by the nation's largest teachers union, the National Education Association, just a couple of months ago. I think it was held in Philadelphia. But, we know that Joe Biden in general is not a friend to school choice. But this clip, he says something that's extremely outrageous. And so here it comes.
And so the point is, if I'm president, Betsy DeVos's whole notion from charter schools to this are gone.
Okay, so people will say to you, Corey, that you're taking that out of context. In fact, they said that to me, too, when I tweeted it out, because they're saying that Biden is just talking about Betsy DeVos's notion of charter schools, which includes for-profit charter schools. That's the part he meant that will be gone, is what they say.
Yeah, and DeVos doesn't only call for-profit charter schools, and the vast majority of charter schools in the United States, around 88% of them are not for-profit charter schools. So that's a totally ridiculous argument. It's grasping at, it's the equivalent of grasping at straws to try to defend Joe Biden's statement in any way that they can. But look, he's saying, essentially that if I'm president, charter schools are gone. Of course, he said something about Betsy DeVos notion. Maybe he's arguing to get rid of, private school choice as well. But he specifically says charter schools are gone.
And you and I did the same thing. Great minds think alike. We saw this and we both said, oh, I wonder what Joe Biden's education policy page says about charter schools to help clarify this issue, where we might see, oh, I guess we're wrong. He does on his policy page endorse nonprofit charter schools. And yet what we actually found,
you do a control F, and there's no mention of charter schools at all on his campaign website. But there is this that's kind of related, I guess. And I think he accidentally makes an argument for school choice here on his education plan. It says that we're going to ensure that no child's future is determined by their zip code. I see that, and charter school parents may see that as an argument for school choice, because in the current system, without school choice, you're residentially assigned to a particular failing school, and you have to go there whether you like it or not. So we would argue that's an argument for, but he is arguing that we just need to spend a ton of money in different
or government school choice, public school choice, interdistrict and stuff like that. It can be argued it means that.
Yeah, maybe magnet schools and just pour more money into the system. He has explicitly called for pouring more money into the system. And he has said this quote in a different public forum before, and I've shared it on Twitter before, but right before he said, no child's future should be determined by their zip code. He said he was talking all about just increasing federal funding of education or government schooling. And so I think that's what he's hinting at. But I think he's careful on his website not to mention charters and to not, mention anything about school choice, because look, he wants to get the vote of the charter school parents and he wants to get the support of the teachers unions. So when he says something like this, the teachers unions know that he's not arguing for school choice, but the teachers union, but the parents, so the teachers unions will still support him, but the parents might be tricked by this kind of, how he's crafting his words here.
I see.
And so
Careful wordplay to
get both, but then also get the money from the teachers unions. That
Right.
seems to make sense to me. Otherwise, he would just say flat out, "I don't support," or charter schools are gone. He would say that on his campaign website, but he knows if he does that, he's going to lose a lot of the votes that he would like to get.
Right. And I'm going to try to share my screen on here. You think that'll work?
We can try it.
All right, let's see. Let's hit it.
I can stop my screen share. Right, mine stopped.
Select window or screen.
Yeah, that's the toughest part. Picking the right window. Make sure you know.
I know. Exactly. Dox myself. Okay, you can tell me if it's working because I'm now looking at my other screen.
I don't see you.
Oh, really? All right. Well,
what were you trying to pull up?
Nevertheless, it was just the
Biden clip that came up recently.
No, it was just the Biden education policy page I was going to show, but people get the idea. They can find it for themselves, and we can see it has all kinds of details about spending more on this and that, and helping teachers, and double the number of psychologists, and bring needed support for students and parents into our public schools, and defeat the National Rifle Association is in his school education page. But nothing of, not the word charter, can nary be found. So, anyway.
Well, and we got to point it out that just the other day he was saying something about like this went viral, right? And people got pretty upset about this. I don't have the clip with me, but he said something at the end of his Breakfast Club interview where he said like, if you don't know who you're going to vote for, you ain't black.
Yes. Which Charlemagne the God.
That is completely ridiculous for you to say that because you are this particular race.
Although,
you have to vote for me. And that's
so what the mainstream media did was like they all made the story about his apology because he then apologized quickly, and then every coverage was about, oh, look how he apologized. Oh, everybody's celebrating his apology. So that was kind of like how it got spun. Before we get off Biden,
what's interesting though is what I pointed out the other day on Twitter is that charter schools serve much higher proportions of black students than the traditional government schools.
You did
and
that.
So like, if he's going to be saying those things on live video, he should also be for charter schools if that's, the population that he wants to represent. Right. And maybe that's why on his campaign website, he doesn't say one way or another if he supports charter schools. But both of us did the same thing and went straight to his campaign website to see if he even had the word mentioned, and he didn't.
Ixnay on the Arterche. And then speaking of Biden, we had 2 open letters to Joe Biden this week, in the last 7 days anyway. We record this on a Wednesday. One from 215 school advocates, it was called. It was Diane Ravitch was in there, Michael Moore, the famous school advocate Michael Moore. Also Danny Glover was in it, Cornel West, Princeton professor. These people said, here is what we should do with the future of public education. Candidate Biden. What are some of those things in their recommendations? Ban for-profit charter schools, it says. Support the NAACP's moratorium on public funds for charter school expansion until a national audit has been completed to determine the impact of charter growth in each state. Okay, they need a national audit.
What do they even mean by the impact of charter growth? Are they going to say, oh, well, you're reducing funding for the government schools, so that's a negative impact on us. So, it's like McDonald's trying to send a letter to Joe Biden and say, like, wait, hey, if you're president, you should make all Burger Kings illegal. I mean, this is essentially what it is, right? Like, squash our competition. We don't want to have to compete. They're going to take money from us. because we're not doing a good job, and all the families are leaving whenever they get the chance to do so.
Yes, and without saying we want the opposition to be illegal, what they actually say, they try to find something that's more palatable to, the voters than that, which is, we need to just regulate them to death. We're not against them. We just need to make their lives so miserable that it's a war of attrition, and we drive them out of business, essentially, drive them away. But they go on with that. They're also insisting on things like give teachers a much-deserved raise by setting a starting salary for no less than $60,000, which would then be pegged to the cost of living, expanding collective bargaining rights and teacher tenure. Wow, boy, that's a good one, huh? Funding out-of-pocket expenses for classroom materials. They want the federal government to fund out-of-pocket. What does that even mean? Out-of-pocket expenses for classroom
because
materials.
They spend all the money on administrators and support staff bloat.
Oh, okay. A federal line item for that.
The argument is that the teachers are paying for things out of pocket, and sometimes teachers are, but it's because the districts are wasting the dang money. They're not spending it on the classroom.
Right. And I'll give you two more quickly. It says provide year-round free universal school meals. Okay, I guess that's so that all children, none of them will have to ever eat at home. And then it also says cancel all student loan debt, of course, and place a cap on student loan interest rates moving forward. So I guess if you borrow going forward, there will be student loans. But if you were one day, too old for the cutoff date or so, whatever, some kids get it all erased, but then I guess new student loans could be taken out and not free tuition. So anyway, that's just some of those. So we had those, but then we had kind of another letter to Joe Biden from the reform side coming back to us. And it was written by the great Howard Fuller. There it is. Howard Fuller said across the nation, many charter schools, including those governed and led by Black and Latino parents, have responded to the crisis. They led with innovation in preparing distance learning models, etc. Then Howard Fuller writes, Vice President Biden, we demand to be seen, valued, and heard. We want to be more than a photo op used in your campaign literature. We will not accept second-class citizenship. We demand our seat at the table so you can hear and learn from our collective expertise and experiences which come out of rich histories of struggle against oppression in this country. And I would just it reminds me of those EdNext surveys, which show both charter and voucher support higher among minority groups than white Democrats. So that if you're a Black Democrat or a Hispanic Democrat, you're the majority of those cohorts support both charter choice and private school choice, even universal vouchers. Those minority groups who are Democrats majority support for both major forms of school choice. It's the white Democrats who have less than 50% support for school choice. So Howard Fuller making that argument directly to and publicly to Vice President Biden.
Yeah, I was just trying to pull up really quickly since that's a great poll that we should cite. It's from 2019, the Education Next survey. It's a nationally representative poll. But as Bob was saying, if you look at support for things like vouchers for low-income students, you look at who supports it. I mean, overall, the general public is pretty 50-50 on it, more support than oppose. But then when you look at racial demographics, the minority population, 66% of the Black population supports vouchers for low-income individuals or families, and only 42% of white individuals. Hispanic is even higher than the Black support at 69%. And if you look at vouchers for everyone, regardless of your income, it's the same kind of thing here where the general public is more likely to support universal vouchers, 55%. But then when you break it down by race, again, minorities are overwhelmingly more favorable to support private school choice than white voters. Black and Hispanic, 62% of those populations in the United States in the most recent Education Next survey support vouchers for all students. And that's
and to clarify, the difference between the numbers I gave were for all Democrats. They also broke it out by political party. And so so if you're just looking at all Democrats, white Democrats are in the 30 to 40% range support. The Black and Hispanic Democrats are in the 55 to 65% support range. So, but yes, if you just add if you forget about political party, then those numbers show actually majority support for whites, blacks, and Hispanics for both major forms of school choice. Okay, so let's see. What do we got next? Go ahead.
I want to hit up on a couple things. You brought up the Washington Post, so I want to bring up something else by the Washington Post. They made an error that I think was extremely misleading just the other day, where their DC education reporter, Perry Stein, you can't say that this is because of incompetence, because this is the DC Washington Post education report. It's their beat, it's their location, and they're talking about how the mayor called for an increase in spending in this article. Mayor Bowser
base spending. Look at that. Look at how they play with words and language and numbers, right? Base spend. Let's define 84 kinds of spending so that we can cite a number and confuse everyone.
So yes, here's the quote. Essentially says that DC schools cost about $11,310 in base spending per student, and this whole article is about increasing total spending in DC. And I just questioned, well, why didn't they point out that DC actually spends 3 times that amount? This number is actually a year off. It's actually higher than $30,000. It's $31,280 per year in DC, about triple the amount that was cited. And of course, I mean, the error here is it always seems to be in the direction downwards.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, it's always convenient that the mistake, which we don't know if it was intentional or not, so I'm just going to call it a mistake for now. But look, this is your beat. This is your location. Why didn't you get this right? You must know that DC spends over $30,000 per year. It's a well-known fact in the education community, especially if you're covering DC education news. The only reason I could think of anyone wanting to put this lower number is to persuade the public that we need to spend more. Because look, if you're reading this, your takeaway is that DC spends $11,000 per year, and that's the wrong takeaway.
Of course it is.
And if you have that takeaway, you're going to say, "Yeah, dang, this is expensive here. We should spend more than $11,000." Right? And so that influences the public to call for more spending in education if they think we spend a third of what we actually spend. So I wanted to point that out.
And of course, a quick way to think of these numbers for those that don't know, I think plenty of people have talked about this, but if you just imagine 10 students, you can add an extra 0 to that number. So if it's 30,000 per student in DC, if it's 10 students is 300,000 a year. So 20 students, which is even less than a normal size classroom, would be 600,000 students per year. So then you think to yourself, all right, 20 students, less than a normal size class, 600,000 being spent on those 20 students. Where does it all go?
Yep, 80,000. The average teacher salary is 80,000. And
you subtract the teacher salary, you're left with another 520 and just these round numbers. And of course, there's always some overhead. Every entity and organization has some overhead.
30% for pensions and stuff. And so you divide that by 600,000. The teachers are only getting, less than a fifth of the resources that go towards the classroom. And as I discussed before, when I talked with CEO of Prenda Microschools, they allocate 60% of their resources to teachers. So let's imagine if 60% of resources went to the teachers out of the 600,000, and you get a salary of 360,000 if they could just be as efficient as the private market, or at least as the microschools. You can tell why the microschools are much more efficient. They have classes in the homes.
It's mostly an administrator staff. So yes, you do have to cover the cost of a principal and an assistant principal and a nurse and a couple of some. But it's a question of how many of those people there are. And in public education, most people. That's what my entry into the subject matter was, kind of looking at the dumbfounding numbers of administrators and consultants, by the way, that are hired by public school districts. 10 years ago, one of my first trips to a public school in this capacity, I was waiting to talk to a principal, and there was a woman sitting across from me, and this was in Jersey City, and it was in a middle school, and I said, well, I'm here. What are you here for? And she explained she was a consultant the district had hired to teach the teachers how to teach reading. Her job was a consultant to teach the teachers how to teach. Now, if you looked at all of their documentation, they were all supposedly like highly qualified teachers. They were all certified, right? They had all these kind of nonsense rubber stamp qualifications. And yet the district was still hiring these outside consultants. Was it needed? I don't even know if it was needed or not. It could have just been somebody's friend who ran a consulting company in education, and maybe they were cozy with the superintendent or the school board or something like that, or a principal. And this consulting company got this gig to come and teach the teachers. But money disappears like that in public education all the time, and no one ever knows it goes anywhere. And on a spreadsheet, it looks reasonable. It looks like, oh, this is a reading consulting company to help us, teach reading. But in fact, who's really checking what those consultants are doing? Who is an outside entity that is maybe, going to audit them in a way that's independent? The answer is nobody in American education is generally checking those things.
Well, and when you look at the overall trends, I think this becomes more evident that in recent years, support staff or non-teaching staff have outnumbered the number of teachers in the United States. There are about 3.2 million teachers, and
Right.
there are about 3.3 or 3.4 million non-teaching staff in the United States. So I think that becomes a little bit more evident, and over time as well, that spending goes up by a large amount each year, but then teacher salaries have been relatively flat over the past couple of decades.
Yeah,
so
also
the money's
benefits
not
too, a
going.
lot.
Yeah, I mean the money's not going to the teacher salaries at least.
All right, let's move on. I'm getting nervous. I gotta get everything. We
I
got
know.
this charter school in Buffalo, man. Look at this. Buffalo Academy of Science Charter School. If you want to get mad, read this story. You can go on, the Choice Media website has it. If you go under the states and click New York, you'll probably find it faster. But this is about a school that was killing it. The Buffalo Academy of Science Charter School. It ranked 4th in math proficiency and 6th in science among all the district and charter schools in Buffalo. The school, let's see, its
90% low
graduation
income.
rate, 90% low income. Graduation rate was 94%. Okay, by comparison, the state graduation rate is 83%. And in Buffalo public schools, it's 65%. This school's graduation rate was 94%. It had a good financial and management shape. It was in a good financial shape, according to the New York State Education Department's charter school office.
Yeah.
And yet, in one night, basically, this is facing closure. Why? Why would they kill such a great school? I'm pounding the desk. I'm like,
Because
with
it's
the
a
shoe.
great school, Bob. If
They're
you were-
killing this school
Why?
just because the district feels like they have lost money because of lower taxes and the coronavirus. It's nothing to do with the school at all.
Yep, it's all about
They
money. It's all
talk about a
monopoly
public meeting.
power.
Yeah, they talk about a public meeting that lasted 4 hours and 16 minutes. It began with presentations by the education department saying the emergency response to the pandemic was this, the next fiscal year would be a nightmare economically for the district. And it rattled several regions, according to this story that I'm pulling up.
Well, did you see that the reporter actually got one of the Board of Regents to give a quote and to actually, agree to the interview? I'm going to read it off real quick because it doesn't make any sense. And the Board of Regents gets caught and she ducks out of the interview because she knows that her arguments aren't making any sense. So I'll just read it from the story. Here's the story from the local news station in Buffalo. One of Buffalo's highest
NPR
public
station,
schools faced closure. Here's why. At the end, they provide the full quote and the full exchange between the reporter and her name is Collins, one of the Board of Regents that voted against.
She's the Western New York representative of the New York State Board of Regents.
Yeah, and so they had to put the whole conversation because they didn't want to look like they were misquoting her, and they didn't want to look like they were I guess they had to provide the whole thing because the response just doesn't make any sense at all. So look, the reporter Mackey points out that I want to know what's your response to the parents who are upset about a good charter school is being closed. What's your response to those parents? Collins, word for word here. There are more than one charter school in the city of Buffalo.
True.
There's the public school sitting there. There are parents who have children in their schools. In the charter schools and also in the Buffalo public schools. Please continue to do what you have to do as a parent, whatever that is, to educate your children. That's all I have to say. That as a parent and as a former nurse who worked for the Buffalo School District years ago, do whatever you can to educate your children. The Buffalo public school, the charter school, the Catholic schools, whatever schools out there, do whatever you have to do. I mean, I can't tell parents what to do, but all I can say is support your children and make sure that they get a fine education wherever they are. The reporter snaps back, well, I think that's the issue, that the Buffalo Science Academy parents are saying that, well, we're actually happy with the education that our students are getting at Buffalo Science Academy, and now that's being taken away from us. Here's the response by Collins, who voted against the school. Okay, I understand. I think I've answered the question. No, you haven't. Parents are responsible for making the decisions for their children. I agree. We give them, the district as well as the charter schools, they make the decision on where they want to send their kids. I can't make that for them. So I think this is, we should end this conversation right about now. Yeah, you should, because
you can't make that for them. She's by closing their school. Exactly. She is making the decision for them.
Exactly. So, and she knew exactly what happened in that interview. She's like, oh crap. But I'm making the argument that she's making the argument that families should be able to do whatever they can to choose their schools. But at the same time, well, yeah, that's what we were asking you. Why are you not allowing them to choose their schools? Why did you close their perfectly good school that's performing way better than the other schools? They can't just choose their charter school or private school when you're not allowing them to. That's the whole point. And she understood that. That's why she says, I think we should end this conversation right about now, once she realized that she wasn't getting anywhere.
Ann Hall is the CEO of the Northeast Charter Network. She said in her 12 years of charter school administration and advocacy, she's never seen a successful charter school, one as successful as Buffalo Science, get shut down. The woman, all of the people voting to shut this school down are proactively. I think it's clear, but I get all worked up, Corey. They are taking a better school, closing it, and forcing kids to go to their schools, even if you believe right. So by basically every measure, not just test scores, graduation rates, not just graduation rates, parent demand, not just parent demand, by all kinds of metrics. This charter school is fantastic, and they don't even care.
They're closing it down. They're closing it down for the least advantaged kids too. They're not just doing it for some hoity-toity school where there's a bunch of advantaged kids. They're killing it on all of these metrics, and they're serving a 90% low-income student population, and it's also a majority minority student population as well. Right. And they're closing down this school. It's completely despicable in my view. That's completely despicable. They shouldn't be doing that, especially when it's harming disadvantaged groups. And that's just there's no explanation for this besides wanting to protect a monopoly system. And as I've said before, if McDonald's had the same power, McDonald's would vote over and over again to get rid of Burger Kings that were nearby, especially if the Burger Kings had high ratings. They wouldn't really have a need to get rid of a Burger King that no one wanted to go to because it was dirty or whatever. The market would shut it down itself.
Yeah, no one would sign up. Yeah,
your incentive is to shut down the restaurants that are actually stealing business from you or taking business from you.
All right, let's quickly move to the next story. I thought you'd like this, Corey. Detroit district to boost starting teacher salaries by 33%. 33%. And where do they want to recruit from? They want to recruit from charter schools. Oh, my goodness. Why would they do that? Now, Detroit, in case people don't know, it's second to New Orleans in terms of charter enrollment footprint. New Orleans is 100% charter schools. Detroit is second in the country at about 2/3, like 67%. But Detroit Public Schools says they're raising their teacher salaries to over $51,000. The new salary is a 33% increase. It says, and they say, quote, what we're trying to do is recruit teachers. This is the Detroit Public Schools District Superintendent, Nikolai Vitti, blunt about the teachers he wants to hire. Quote, what we're trying to do is recruit teachers with experience from mainly Metro Detroit districts and charter schools. I think that's where the opportunity is highest to recruit, he says. So at any rate, they are. Now, I kind of think I like the idea of a competitive marketplace for teachers that will probably, raise the quality of teachers. If if different districts are trying to hire each other's teachers, maybe that will, probably make it harder for a lousy teacher to be hired if there's a specter of competition for the teacher services. But at any rate, I was just kind of amused by the fact that even a district superintendent is willing to admit that the charter teachers are a place he wants to go recruit.
Yeah, that's totally funny and a crazy admission here. And what's also interesting to me and kind of baffling actually is that we talked about this a couple of weeks ago about how the superintendents were getting.
Oh, you there? Hello? I don't know if you're there. I'm still here. I don't know if people are with me or maybe I'm blown.
In Nebraska, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. Hey, you hear me? Yeah.
Okay.
I could hear you the whole time, and my thing was just circling and restarting. But I said we talked a couple weeks ago about this, how superintendents were getting large raises in places like Nebraska, and it's coming at a time where a lot of the rest of the economy is it's shut down. People aren't getting paid; they're losing their jobs, and taxpayers too are everyday citizens are losing their jobs, and the unemployment rate is spiking because of this government shutdown. But at the same time, we have the public sector, the superintendents, and now here in Detroit, calling for large raises. That just seems to be like bad optics to me.
Okay. So, Corey, we've talked before about the sheer number of sexual abuse stories in public schools, and it's a mind-boggling statistic. We've come up with our own websites, basically a link called sexualabuseinschools.org, which people see just the sheer volume of these stories, and they can't believe their eyes when they see how many of these stories, and also some of the shocking details, of course, too, which you just highlighted. Yeah, it is incessant. It is all the time. And so we see, it just keeps going and going if you keep scrolling. But what we saw is a story from NBC News. Yeah, why don't you talk about that?
Yeah, so K-12 schools keep mishandling sexual assault complaints. I haven't looked into this, Bob, so why don't you take this one?
Okay. So basically, this is about hundreds of lawsuits across the United States that are alleging that these schools keep mishandling sexual complaints. So they start with an anecdote saying this girl, her attacker's friends tormented her. They called her a crazy bitch and a porn star on social media. This is one of the students. One suggested they show her, quote, what rape actually is, unquote, according to the lawsuit. This is a Colorado student. In the summer of 2017, the girl, who's referred to as Jane Doe in the court records, says she'd been sexually assaulted the previous year by a classmate, identified that person. That person later pleaded guilty to assault in juvenile court and was placed on probation. Yet throughout the 2017 to 18 academic year, her friends made her life miserable at this high school, the Glenwood Springs High School in Colorado. But she and her parents told administrators multiple times about all this harassment, indicating that one of her friends threatened to strangle her, and the school never did anything to stop it. They say that the parents met with administrators in March 2018 when they emailed the next day to ask what steps the school had taken. The assistant principal wrote back, the school has taken no actions. And they just go on to explain this is one of at least 330 lawsuits filed across the U.S. since just the beginning of 2018, saying that public schools and some charter schools failed to protect students from sexual assault and harassment or mishandled incidents that came to light. And this is an NBC's own count and their own investigation, the 330 lawsuits. They give an example of a high school student in Georgia who said she was expelled after a student forced her to perform oral sex, and the school's principal didn't believe her account and said he thought she wanted to do it for the boy's birthday. In another case, Michigan district accused of failing to investigate.
The parents knew about these things, right? And they reported it.
Yeah, it's not a case. Right. A Michigan district did fail to investigate complaints. This is not just that these things happened. All these lawsuits are the districts not taking action, not investigating, not believing the parents, not even doing anything. In Texas, the parents of a 4-year-old girl allegedly sexually assaulted by a classmate said in a lawsuit the district initially lied to them about what happened, did not tell them they needed to file a formal complaint, etc. So I just wanted to bring this up because it was NBC News. Finally kind of coming around to this crisis in American public education, which, I hate to talk about it all the time because it's disgusting and
it's happening all the time. That's the problem. You have to talk about it, right? We can't just hide from it.
Yeah.
Right?
Otherwise, nothing changes. Yes.
And I mean, and just to be clear with the listeners, and I know you agree with me here that we talk about it going on in the government-run school system. That doesn't mean it doesn't go on at all in charter schools. It happens in charter schools. It happens in private schools. All these things can happen in any sector. But the main difference is, when you're complaining to the school and they're not doing anything about it, in the traditional system without school choice, you can't vote with your feet and you're stuck there with your tormentor and you still have to pay through property taxes for this type of abuse to happen. Allowing for school choice isn't going to make this never happen, right? It right. will allow you
good point.
to at least at least allow you to have some type of power, some type of bottom-up pressure and accountability to be able to vote with your feet and get out of that situation right when you find out that situation is occurring. And unfortunately, with very wealthy families, they're able to pull their kids out of a school that's doing that. They can move to an expensive house. They can pay for a private school if they find this stuff occurring. But for the least advantaged families, if they don't have the economic means to get out of that school where this stuff is occurring, they're sadly stuck sending their kid back to that environment until something is done about it. So none of these families should have to wait, to get away from this type of abuse.
And as I've said this before, I interviewed a girl one time on camera about basically school choices. It was a little video we're doing about a Catholic school, Catholic schools, and the kinds of educations they provide. But she started talking about this kind of story about being bullied so relentlessly. It wasn't a sexual assault, but it was vicious bullying. And she started weeping on camera and broke down in tears and just said and explained how every day, if you got to go back in that room, she says, where those mean girls hate you. They hate you, and you have to go back in there, and you have to just get that abuse day after day after day, and just started weeping as she's telling the story. And in her case, she ended up escaping to a Catholic school. But in so many cases, parents don't have the money for that tuition, and as we just said. All right, so let's move on. We have something called the new face of education inequality, which is that. Yes, the privilege of keeping children home. This is the Lauren Kammer story of U.S. News, yes. And it's basically about the privilege, essentially the privilege of not going to government schools.
That's always existed, right?
Well, right. Yeah, Abe Lincoln did it. I mean, but the point is I found the framing of it, that this is seen as some people say, well, does the privilege mean you have a parent who can stay home and homeschool you because they're not going to an office? Does the privilege mean that you have the money to pay for online learning and other people don't have the money to pay for online learning? Is the privilege that you have the kind of parent who's educated themselves and therefore they're capable of being a kind of an in-home teacher more than a parent without as much education? So they're all and I kind of just wanted to bring this up and get your sense on it quickly, Corey, in the big picture, because I kind of feel like we are in some ways in the middle of a quiet revolution where, what if we have huge percentages of parents once it comes to next year? Now, some of them might be afraid of COVID-19 and not send their kids to public school for that reason. Some parents may have just discovered the benefits of self-pacing that online learning can offer and won't send their kids to public school for that reason. Maybe there are lots of reasons, but are we on the brink, and it's kind of like we're not aware of it's happening quite yet? But what are you seeing? What if next year? I don't know. What if next year? We saw some of the surveys that were saying that a huge percentage of parents are considering homeschooling next year.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of surveys that have come out finding this. One was most recently a couple of days ago by USA Today, finding that out of the families that they polled, 60% of parents said that they would likely continue homeschooling next year, even if their schools reopened in the fall. And half of them said that they're very likely to continue.
30%
said that they're very likely to continue homeschooling or some form of virtual education.
Yeah, like is
in the
this?
fall.
Oh wow, you got 1,400 likes on that. Nice job, Corey.
Oh, that's
yeah. That's enough. Yeah, it's child's play. I mean, when you see these numbers, 60%, like I can't even believe that's real. Is that, or would that?
Yeah, I mean, this is why we need to look at all of the polls together. And look, I'll just rattle off the statistics that we have on this so far. We have this one saying 60%, it's the most recent. And look, maybe it's, maybe there's some type of margin of error in there. But we have the American Federation for Children survey that came out that was done nationwide. They found that parents were saying that they were 41% more likely to homeschool next year, even after schools reopen. We have the EdChoice nationally representative survey finding that 52% of parents have a more favorable view of homeschooling as a result of COVID-19. We have my informal survey finding that about 23% of families who had students in government schools were going to send them elsewhere next year, either virtual learning or homeschooling or to a private school. So all of these numbers are imperfect on their own, but taken as a whole, they're all pointing in the same direction, and they're all suggesting at least that there's going to be a big shift, a big change happening in education next year, with a lot of people deciding that they're not going to send their kids back to the government schools. When how many
are? I mean, it's a bit of a rhetorical question, but how many of those numbers would change if there were a vaccine tomorrow? How many are people saying, "Oh, because I'm scared of those buildings, of my child being in those buildings," and if there's a vaccine, then they're like, "Oh, okay, well now forget all this homeschooling stuff."
Yeah, I mean, it's a mix, right? I mean, I don't know what the percentage is. There's a certain amount that are saying, they're just afraid of the coronavirus and they don't want to send their kids back. There's a certain amount that say, I don't like the social distancing guidelines. They may not like it. They may not like the safety guidelines. They may not like what schools are looking like in France and China, where all the kids are spaced out too much and they're not really socializing with one another. They may not like that environment. That might be a reason as to why they don't want to send their kids back. It might be that they really like homeschooling. There's going to be some percentage of families that are doing that. It would be good to do a survey to see what are the particular reasons why you don't want to send your kid back. It might be a mix of all of these things for particular families. So that's really all up in the air right now. But what we know from the surveys that we have available to us today is that for whatever the reason is, people are saying that they're not going to send their kids back to the brick and mortar schools next year for a whole host of reasons, a whole bunch of these different reasons. I think it's a little bit of all of it.
And finally, ladies and gentlemen, the school choice Grinches in Tennessee have failed, everyone. We can end on a high note, the program for the day, which is that the attempt to kill Tennessee's ESA has failed. There were efforts in the state house to both delay and also another effort to altogether stop the implementation of some people call it a voucher. Our friends at EdChoice do not call it an ESA. I kind of call it an ESA in Tennessee. At any rate, it's a private school choice program there. And so there was this pushback, two separate pieces of legislation, one by Democrats to eliminate the ESA program, and then a Republican was urging a one-year delay, I guess a Republican state legislator, but they failed to receive the second motion in the House Education Committee. For those parliamentarians out there, we have a commentary video from Shaka Mitchell from American Federation for Children.
Shaka, let's do it. I'll show it up right now.
Hey, good morning. It's Wednesday, May 27th, and I'm Shaka Mitchell with the American Federation for Children. I want to share a story that's near and dear to my heart. Just out today is a story about legislation that would have halted Tennessee's Education Savings Account program. Well, it failed to move forward. It was defeated in subcommittee yesterday. And this is really good news because it means that there's still a chance that thousands of students across Tennessee will get to use the ESA to attend the school of their choice this fall. Now we're waiting for the Tennessee State Supreme Court to free free up the program. It's tied up in litigation right now, but we're still really hopeful. So I hope you continue to pay attention to this story. I know we're all rooting for the kids and the families to be able to use this important program. In the meantime, have a great day, and you can read more stories like this on Choice Media.
So there we go. That's Corey on the Tennessee. Yeah, I mean, it's of course it's still, as he pointed out, it still hasn't begun accepting students. It's still lawsuit after lawsuit.
Hold up now, right? That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the guys that brought that case to the judge to block the program, they both sent their children to private schools, or at least they went to private schools themselves. Hypocrites. But that's good news. That's good news. I'm glad that Choice Media, shared that video from Shaka.
Yeah. All right. Anything else? You feeling good? Everything
That's
good?
all I have. Yeah, I think we hit everything. And we covered a lot of ground today and moved through it pretty quickly. But yeah, I just want to say thanks to all of the people who joined us today, all the audience. There was a lot of comments. I'm sorry we didn't get to feature all of them, but we just had so many stories to hit on, and so I'll be reading through all the comments, though. Don't worry. Even though we're not featuring all of them on the show, we will look over all of them either way. So thank you so much.
Someday we're going to get this. Someday we'll get a producer who'll have the job of throwing those up. Of course. Don't worry, that'll happen. All right, everybody. So thanks.
Cool. Thanks for watching. Until next time, this was Random Assignment.
Okay. See you later.